I'd never been too fond of anyone at my local school. They were a little too rude and boring for me. You see, I grew up in a small area with not many people interested in art like I am, so I had to venture off from home and found myself attending a pretty rural art college. It's sort of like a normal university, except it's full of big-headed people. Now, the only reason why I'm here is because I've always wanted to be an illustrator, a children's book designer of sorts. I'd always taken a keen interest in children's media and classic books, such as the Arthur series. So, when I was sent to live at this college, I was taken back when I realised a lot of the other students here were all fine artists. You know the kind. The ones who like to splatter paint on a canvas and claim it's art. I'm not really big on that sort of thing, but I didn't question it. I settled into the new place pretty quickly. I was sharing a dorm with a few other students. There was myself, a graphic designer named Josh, a film/animator named Lily, and there was one more guy called Daniel. Daniel was one of those fine artists I just described to you. His room was decorated with photographs of distorted women, and he always had weird music playing too. It was sorta like trippy 60s music. He also liked to smoke, so his room always smelled like an old ashtray. It was pretty gross, but he was a nice guy and we all got along well enough. We soon became a tightly packed group of friends. It was the start of a new term for all of us, and we all came back from home after spending the summer there. We all unpacked our things and started talking about what we had done over the summer. I went hiking with my stepdad. We went on some of those summer camps, replied Josh. I spent most of my time with my girlfriend. We watched films and went to watch some plays too, Lily said. She spent a lot of time whining about missing a sporty girlfriend, but we were glad they got some time together. I hadn't really done much worth mentioning. I did the usual stuff. I went out to parties and went on trips with my family. Nothing really that special. I was just about to pipe up and speak when I got interrupted. I spent my time at the dentist, we heard Daniel say. My father is a doctor of sorts, so he let me come with him sometimes and explore the hospital. My favourite place to visit was the dentistry. I got to touch and feel the teeth. It was cool. We all stared at him a bit confused. Were you even allowed to have strangers go into the hospital rooms, let alone play with the equipment? We didn't really care. We knew Daniel was that sort of guy anyway. He was known for getting into trouble for the sake of his art. That was always his excuse. We all spent our first couple of days getting to grips with our assignments. We all found out what we had to do. Naturally, I had to study some illustrators and just mimic their styles. Josh spent some money on a new Mac to do some more design tests, and Lily had to start playing about with claymation. It was a pretty nice vibe when we'd all be at our dorms talking and giving ideas. Well, at least it was nice, until Daniel would start insulting us. He'd never been the same since he came back from the summer break. He seemed more cold and distant. We assumed something must have happened to him over the break, so we decided not to press him on it. He never told us anything about his projects. In fact, he never even told us what the subject was. It was pretty normal for Daniel to be reserved, but never this much. At nights, he'd just make himself some dinner and then shut himself in his room, crank up the music and not be seen until the next morning. The rest of us would go out places, like go bowling or down to a local gig. Daniel used to happily tag along, but not anymore. One night, myself and Josh had just gone out for a long night. Lily didn't come with us. She said she wanted to see if Daniel was okay since he hadn't been talking to us for a few days now. We could see her point and complied. She had spent the evening knocking on his door and trying to get him to speak with her. Just before moving, we saw his door open and Lily step inside before it was locked again. Brushing it off, we head out. We'd gone to see a movie and then go out for a few innocent drinks. It was fun, but we didn't get home till around 2 AM. When we got back, Josh just said, "Good night," and went straight to bed. I hadn't gone to bed yet. I was pretty damn hungry. Drinking always made me hungry, so I raided our fridge and found some cold pizza from the night before. I was going to go back to my room when I realized something I didn't notice before. Daniel wasn't in his room, and Lily wasn't in hers. Due to Daniel's strange new behaviour of locking himself in his room until early hours, and Lily never went anywhere without texting us, this was pretty weird. I went over to his door and gave it a knock, and sure enough, the door just opened right up. It wasn't locked or anything. I assumed he and her had gone out with some of his Ponzi art friends, but it wasn't like Daniel to leave his door open like this. I've always been a bit nosy, so I stepped inside to see if there was any signs that he had gone somewhere. His keys were gone, his jacket was gone too, but he left his wallet on his desk. The other thing that was odd was that he'd left his laptop on his bed, and it was still on. The screen was still lit up. Curiosity got the better of me. Perhaps this could be my chance to find out about his art project he'd been hiding. I mean, Daniel was a fine artist, so it could have been anything. I noticed that he had a USB plugged in, and 2 files on the screen. One was called Dentist Photos, and the other file was a singular image named teeth.jpg. I clicked on the Dentist Photos file, and there was just pictures of people's teeth and plastic molds of teeth. It was nothing interesting. I clicked back off the file and decided to check out teeth.jpg. The image would be forever burned into my brain. It startled me so bad that I slammed the laptop shut, shaking as I sat back. I wasn't sure if I wanted to lift the screen again, but I knew I had to or Daniel would know someone touched his laptop. I lifted the screen again, staring at the image for a brief moment before clicking away from it nervously. I then made a decision. I needed to show this to Josh and Lily in the morning. This was seriously messed up. I mean, I knew that Daniel was an artistic kind of guy, but this was just insane. I quickly bolted back to my own room and scoured for my USB drive. I eventually found it and darted back to Daniel's laptop where I copied the image onto my USB. I stared at the image for a little while longer. I was trying to dismiss the image as a mere photo manipulation, but there was just something so wrong about it. Perhaps it was the black, soulless eyes, or the fact that whoever or whatever this creature was pulling up its mouth in such a weird and disturbing way. It almost looked forced, like whoever this creature was forced to pose in this way. I shook it off as a mere thought and fixed up the laptop so it didn't look tampered with before I went back to my own room. Soon enough, I heard our front door open, then the sound of footsteps, then Daniel's door locking. Daniel was back home, but there were no signs of Lily. The next morning, I waited until Daniel had gone out for one of his lectures, and since it was a Friday, Josh and I had the morning off. I decided now would be a good time to show Josh the image. I asked him if he wanted to see what Daniel had been hiding from us, and he confusedly but also eagerly said yes. I brought my laptop into the living room and loaded up my USB and opened the image for both of us to see. Josh's expression fell into shock before he spluttered. What the hell is that thing? I could tell just by his reaction that both of us were thinking the same thing. This couldn't have been an art project image. There is no way that this would pass as a fine art piece, would it? I mean, sure, art can be creepy at times, but I can't imagine his teachers would appreciate such a creepy and disgusting image. I know that Daniel can be a creepy guy, but this isn't right. We've got to show Lily that... We both cut off one another. We paused briefly before looking at one another in confusion. Where was Lily? I realised that she hadn't come back with Daniel last night, and neither of us had seen her that morning. When I explained to Josh what I did last night, he began to worry. Lily was never the kind to just sneak off and not tell anyone. I picked up my phone and began to ring her mobile. For a while, there was silence. Then, just from Lily's room, we heard a faint buzzing sound. Josh got up and walked into Lily's room rather quickly. He'd never been one to go into girls' rooms, and came back out holding Lily's phone in his hand with a worried look on his face. Lily was gone, and we had no way to get a hold of her. But maybe she has just gone to a lecture and forgot her phone, I stuttered. Josh shook his head, chewing on his lip out of nerves. No, Lily doesn't have lectures on a Friday, remember? She'd normally at least say hello to us and take a phone. We know she lives on that thing. She never stops texting her girlfriend. He was right. Lily's life revolved around her phone, so we knew there would be no way she'd leave it. Suddenly, her phone lit up. Someone was calling her. We both looked at the phone, then back at one another, before Josh passed the phone to me. I brought it up to my ear before speaking. Hello? On the other end of the line, I realised it was her girlfriend that was calling. I recognised her husky voice. Ah, Lily, there you are. Thank God you're okay. You didn't text me at all last night or this morning. I thought something was wrong. I cringed a little bit, realising I had to break it to her that I wasn't Lily. As I spoke, I heard her girlfriend begin to get upset. She was breathing quite heavily, and I could hear the sniffling sound someone makes when they cry. I felt so bad for her, but perhaps she could be my chance to find out anything I could about Lily. What? Where is Lily? She hasn't spoken to me since last night. I thought she was just playing a joke on me, but now I don't know. I looked at Josh with a bit of a confused stare as he began to pace around a little bit. I put the phone on loudspeaker and asked her, "Why do you think Lily was playing a joke on you? Did she say something odd?" "Yes," her girlfriend replied. "She sent me one message at around 1:30 AM. I looked at Josh, baffled, before I asked again, "What did the message say?" "Help me." I looked at Josh with wide and worried eyes. Lily would never pull a prank like that on anyone, let alone her own girlfriend. She always told us how worried she'd be about her girlfriend getting paranoid, so we knew she wouldn't send a message like that unless she had a reason. I continued to speak with her girlfriend, but I was getting nowhere. So I reassured her that we know where Lily was and she'd be calling her back tonight. Her girlfriend seemed suspicious, but just agreed and put the phone down. Myself and Josh paced back and forth. We had no idea what this could mean. Why would Lily send a message like that? We continued to think for a while and decided until we knew where Lily was, we were going to skip our lectures. We spent a long time thinking over things and began to write down connections we could make. Afterwards, Josh read out the list to me so I could think them over. First, Lily goes into Daniel's room at around 10 PM. She's locked in his room. Then, we return home at 2 AM. During that time, at around 1:30 AM, we find out that Lily texts the girlfriend with a message saying, "Help me." You discover that neither Lily or Daniel are home yet. Daniel's door is unlocked and his laptop is still left on. You find the image and then leave. You then return to your room and hear Daniel come home but not Lily. Lily is still not back home yet, but Daniel is. What the hell could this all mean? I thought over it for a while and then came to a conclusion. I didn't want to make the connection, but it's the only connection I could salvage. Daniel did something to Lily. We have to confront Daniel tonight if Lily doesn't come home between now and tonight, okay? Josh looked shocked, but he agreed. Daniel would be our only chance to find out what happened to Lily. Later that night, there were still no signs of Lily. We knew that her girlfriend would be calling soon, so we decided to turn the phone off. We didn't want to try and reassure her with false information. We waited until around 6 PM before Daniel finally came home. He looked rather startled to see us, both standing there in the living room, and he lightly placed his art folder and satchel down against the sofa. As we both stood up, Josh spoke to him, and I could tell he was trying to keep his composure. "Daniel, we'd like to have a talk. It's about Lily." Daniel's eyes seemed to widen ever so slightly, but nothing I thought was worth thinking over. He tilted his head at us, looking confused as he asked us, "Why? Is something wrong?" I shook my head. I didn't want him to think we were accusing him of anything. We would never get any answers out of him if we straight up accused him like that. Daniel seemed to look a little on edge, looking away from us as he itched his wrist under his baggy grey jumper. He pushed his rather dark black bangs out of his face as he spoke. "Then, what's wrong? Is she okay? I mean, I know she left her phone here last night, so I suppose there wouldn't be any way to get hold of her." We didn't say anything. We weren't too sure on what to say to him. How are we supposed to ask him if he did anything to Lily without him taking offense? I then realized something. It'd taken me a moment to realize it before I spoke. "You just said she left her phone here last night, right? How the hell did you know that?" I could see Josh's eyes light up. He just realized the same thing I did. How on earth did Daniel know she left her phone behind, unless they went somewhere? We already acknowledged the fact that Lily never leaves her phone anywhere, so how on earth did he know she had left it behind? Daniel didn't answer us. He was silent for a while before he pushed past us and walked into his room, slamming the door shut. We walked over to his door, banging on it harshly before he shouted, "Leave me alone! I have coursework to do. I'm sure Lily will show up tonight. Just stop being so paranoid." We just didn't know what to do. Daniel clearly knew way more than he let on, but there was no way we were going to get it out of him. We walked back into the living room and slumped back down. I ran a hand through my hair. What the hell was going on? I then realized that Daniel had left his bags on the sofa. He must have been too flustered to pick them up when he stormed into his room. I peered around to Daniel's door, hearing no sound of him leaving his room yet. I knew soon enough he would be coming out to get his bags. In a moment of madness, I picked up the satchel and emptied its contents onto the coffee table. I could see Josh's eyes widen before he whispered to me frantically, What the hell are you doing? What if he sees you?" I didn't care. I needed to know anything I could about Lily. She was a roommate, but also a best friend. I couldn't just leave this to solve itself. I pushed through the documents and came across what looked like a ticket. I crumpled it up and pushed it in my pocket. Then I found a zip-up document bag. I pushed it into Josh's hands and told him to go hide it. He complied and went and hid it in his room. I then quickly put all the other stuff back into Daniel's bag and rested it upright like it looked before. I then got up and walked into Josh's room. I watched Daniel go back to the living room and pick up his bag before he walked back to his room again. Josh grabbed the zip-up file from under his pillow as we both sat down on his bed. We didn't say anything. We just read the front cover of the file. Teeth. It sent chills up my spine. I knew that whatever was inside would have a connection to the image I found on the computer, but what we saw was nothing we expected. It was a series of photographs. The first photo was a picture of what looked like an abandoned room of sorts. The walls were covered in old floral wallpaper, and the floor was just damp wood. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. Then, the next photos were just pictures of tools and plastic tools. We then noticed that the tools were linked to dentistry. You know, the needles and drills. It was pretty creepy. But it was the next photos that made us both drain of colour. It was just photos of Lily, smiling. We flipped through every single photo of Lily, and in each one she had a big, toothy smile. Such a sweet smile. One of her most distinct features was a large front tooth. Just the left one. We always found it cute, but now it was no laughing matter. We noticed on the back of the photographs there were labels, and each tooth on each photo was marked. There were notes on the photos that said things like remove or replace. It knocked Josh sick, and I was more terrified now than ever. We knew that we couldn't confront Daniel about these photos. It would get us nowhere. We sat in silence for a long time, staring at the photos with disbelief. I then remembered the ticket I found and stuffed in my pocket. I reached into my pocket with a shaky hand and pulled it out. Bringing to my vision, it read, Group Ticket 2, Location Station Road, Date 28th of the 9th, 2011, Time 11:34 PM. We both looked at each other with firm gazes. It was just yesterday evening. We knew exactly what we had to do now. We had to find where Lily was. We never saw Daniel for the rest of the evening, and Josh had become incredibly paranoid. He asked if he could sleep in my room tonight, although I thought it was a bit awkward. I didn't mind. I mean, he was scared real bad, so I didn't want to leave him alone like that. When Josh was sleeping, I printed off the disturbing image for referencing. Then, I'd spent most of the night planning for the next day. I had already emailed our lecturers, letting them know we weren't going to show up because we felt sick, and I checked how far Station Road was. To my surprise, it was only an hour's drive away. So I figured we could take Josh's car up to Station Road and figure out the location where Daniel and Lily have been from there. The whole time, I kept staring at the teeth.jpg image. A horrible thought crept into my mind. I didn't want to think about it, but it could have been a possibility. Was the person in the picture Lily? Every time I thought about it, I'd shake it off, telling myself I was just paranoid. But it would all add up. The timing, the photographs, it would all make sense. I didn't want to believe it, and I certainly wasn't going to until we found Lily. The next morning, myself and Josh got up around 6 AM. We wanted to be out of the dorms before Daniel woke up, and we made sure to lock our own doors. We also decided to take Lily's phone with us. We didn't want to leave anything behind that would indicate that we were suspicious. We left the dorm room and got into Josh's car. I had brought a long and small bag of different things, such as the photographs, a flashlight, a camera, and a notepad with a pen. We loaded ourselves into the car and made our way towards Station Road. We were able to pinpoint it with my mobile GPS. When we got there, we found that we were in a rather abandoned-looking area of town. The place was practically deserted. All we could see were tall, crumbling buildings and little empty houses. We took out the photo of the room and began to walk up to each little house. We pressed our faces to the glass to see if we could make out the floral wallpaper like the room in the photograph. We spent a good few hours doing this. Nothing. We were getting pretty angry at this point. We just wanted to get Lily back. Josh got so angry that he walked up to one of the house walls, kicking it harshly as he shouted from the top of his lungs, "Daniel, you asshole!" Just as he kicked the wall one last time, we noticed the wall began to tear, like paper. Josh looked down at his foot and realised he had tore what looked like a piece of painted paper away from the stone wall. He then began to rip away the remaining pieces of paper, only to reveal what looked like an outdoor basement. The doors were rusted and scratched, but we noticed that the metallic handle was clean, as if it had been tampered with. Josh looked over his shoulder to me, and I gave him a nod. I quickly took a photo of the layout of the basement-like thing. Josh then walked down to the doors and gave them a push. And to both of our surprises, the doors were simply blocked with a plank of wood, which Josh was able to push away with ease. We then pushed open the doors slowly and cautiously. Who knows what could be kept in here? It was obviously hidden for some reason. If only we knew what was coming. Perhaps it would have saved us both from throwing up. We stepped inside. We were met with a rancid odour. Neither of us knew what the smell was, but we know it made us both feel instantly sick. Josh gagged and coughed, covering his face with his shirt. I swallowed back vomit as I continued to walk. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it inside the pitch-black stone room. I continued to walk, and we heard nothing. As we walked further into the room, the smell only thickened. It was getting so bad that Josh threw up behind me. He quickly composed himself and stumbled back upright before we continued. As I looked around the room, my eyes met with something on the floor that made my heart race and the flashlight drop from my grasp. It was Lily's knitted sweater. It was the sweater she always wore when we went out for pizza or to go bowling. It was the same grey sweater with the same little torn thread on her sleeves where she would chew on it. I could see Josh from the corner of my eye. His eyes were just as wide as mine as the last of the colour drained from his face. I picked up the sweater, slowly, holding it in front of me when I noticed there was a large and thick bloodstain soaking all the way through the jumper. It started thick from the collar and became thinner as it went down the sweater. I was now the one to throw up. I collapsed onto my knees, puking heavily. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know what to think. I soon maintained myself and stood up again, holding the flashlight as I put the sweater in my bag. Through blurred, teary eyes, I pressed on. I found nothing from where I was standing, and I heard a small light switch flicker on from behind me as a red light filled the corner of the room. And then, I heard him. Josh screamed louder than anything I ever heard before. My stomach was in knots, and I shined my light onto where he was standing. He was standing over a large black table. I watched him just stand there in complete terror, as if he was frozen. I could only imagine what he was looking at, and I truly wished I left it to my imagination. I walked over to his side. There, I laid my eyes on the sight before me. It was Lily. She was strapped down onto the table, wearing nothing but her jeans. Her body was covered in thick layers of tape, keeping her strapped down. One of her arms dangled down to one of her sides, but the other arm was nowhere to be seen. In replacement was just a taped up stub with stains of blood under it. I could hardly breathe. My stomach was now so knotted, and my breathing so tight that all I could do was stare. I looked up at Lily's face. Her head had been forced back, and we could see that her innocent blue eyes had been violently gouged out. And in replacement was thick black wax that filled up the empty eye sockets. Her nose had been contorted and broken, snapped in many places. But the worst part of it all was her mouth. Her jaw had been forced open, and we could see her mouth had also been filled with the same black wax. Her teeth had been ripped out and misplaced in all different directions. I then noticed how her mouth had been stretched upright, her cheek tearing to reveal more teeth that had been pulled from her mouth. It gave her a contorted, horrible smile. Her face was covered in streams of her own dried up blood. I stared at the hand that was holding the mouth open. It was her own. Her own hand had been stitched to the ripped cheek. The flesh was torn and falling apart under her nails. Her nails were cracked and chipped, with staples and little threads holding the hand in place. The red fluorescent light created horrific shadows and highlighted every grotesque feature that was now on Lily's face. I silently and numbly pulled out the picture of teeth.jpg and stared at it, then back to the real thing. They were identical. Josh brought a shaky hand over Lily's cheek before he collapsed by the side of the table. I could hear him sobbing horrendously by her side before he passed out beside me. I too felt like I was on the brink of collapsing, but something caught my attention. I could feel the presence of someone else coming into the room, but I already knew who it was, and I knew now there was nothing we could do about it. I heard the door slam shut and the plank of wood being placed over the door. I heard the sound of footsteps. I heard them inch closer and closer until I could feel their presence behind me. I knew he was there, and I knew that there was no way out. I heard their voice speak very faintly behind me. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but it's okay. It's all for the sake of art." But that wasn't what made me collapse. I knew well enough from here that my fate was sealed. After he finished speaking, I heard one more tiny sound that made my heart both ache and my tears only stream further down my numb cheeks. Before my vision faded away from me and my hands slip away from the table, I could hear Lily choking. I was only 12 at the time. I was playing in the scrapyard with some of my best friends. My father was good at all different kinds of things, but flourished on vehicles and motorized machines of any type. He was always hauling in a new broken down truck or an old busted up washing machine, and had no problem with letting my friends and me play in the scrap piles that lay in the backyard. We were out one day just messing about, shooting John's new BB gun, which he had just been given for his 13th birthday. We were all eager for our turn to shoot the beautiful Red Rider, so we scrounged up some old cans from a bin my dad kept in the basement and started plinking away. A few hours later, it was starting to get dark, so we decided that it was time to wrap it up and meet again tomorrow. Dan, who was the smallest and the most insecure one in the group, was having his turn with a gun and shot one last BB at the can. The BB flew right into the can, ricocheted to the left, and hit the front right window of an old F-150 that my dad had brought in last week. The window shattered. Dan could hardly comprehend what he'd just done. He stood there in shock, just staring at the window. I ran up to him and told him it would be fine, and that I'd take the blame for it. He looked almost to the point of tears, so I gave him a pat on the back and told him to go home. After apologizing about 50 times, he finally left. Bill, John, and Joseph followed soon after. When they were gone, I went to check the extent of the damage done to the window. It was completely broken, shattered all over the seat and floor. I opened the door to see if the BB had somehow made it into the truck. I was scanning the floor, sifting through the glass, when I noticed a small cut in the upholstery of the right seat. I reached into the slit and felt something hard and smooth. I grabbed a hold of it and pulled out what appeared to be a small bottle of bubble juice. The liquid inside of the clear glass bottle had a slight purple tint to it. It was a neat find, whatever it was, so I kept it for tomorrow to show the guys. Tomorrow came, my buddies arrived, and I eagerly ran over to them. Dan came up to me first to ask how much trouble I had gotten in for the truck incident. I promptly told him what had happened, and how my dad said he wasn't going to get much for it anyway. He looked relieved. Anyway, I said, guess what I found while looking through the glass on the floor of the truck? The guys gathered around in excitement. They all said, "What?" in unison, as their eyes widened with curiosity. I pulled out the little bottle of juice and showed it to them. "What is it?" Bill asked. "I'm not sure," I replied. "I found it in a tiny slit in the upholstery of the truck." "I dare you to drink it," John shouted. "Are you serious? No way," I shouted. "Oh, come on," they all insisted. "It must be a shot of alcohol or something. It couldn't possibly be harmful." "Hey, you get a buzz off it," I thought to myself. After looking at it questioningly, I, being extremely susceptible to peer pressure, decided to open it. It smelled like nothing. I could not make out an aroma at all. There had to be at least some smell, I thought. I passed it around the group and everyone else confirmed that it had no smell. "Must be fine to drink then," said John, and he gave me a thumbs up. I looked into the bottle, closed my eyes, and downed it in one gulp. I woke up on the ground with all my friends around me, looking extremely concerned. "You alright, buddy?" asked John. "Yeah," I replied. "Just a bit dizzy." "How long was I out?" I asked. "Only 20 seconds or so," replied John. They helped me to my feet as I swayed from side to side. I felt very disorientated and lethargic. I didn't want to play anymore, so we went inside to my room. They hung out with me for a while, too scared to tell anyone what had happened for fear of getting in trouble. After a couple of hours, they finally had to leave. I decided to just sleep and see if I felt any better in the morning. That night, I had really strange dreams. I was floating in what appeared to be water in complete darkness. I couldn't feel any part of my body. There was a person floating just far enough away from me that I couldn't make out who he was. He was unnaturally pale, almost completely white. His whole body was extremely skinny, like he had no muscle at all. When I called out to him, he just turned his head slightly and looked to where I was floating. It felt wrong. Something wasn't right the way he stared at me. Then I noticed his eyes, or lack of eyes, I should say. He had large black holes where his eyes should have been. He then smiled. I wouldn't have been able to tell if his mouth hadn't been stretched across his whole face. He looked happy, almost euphoric. He started to inch towards me in the water, smiling that sick smile the whole time. I tried to turn and swim away, but I was too weak to move my limbs. I looked away in fear and tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I tried to curl up into a ball, so I would be smaller and less easy to see, but I couldn't get myself to budge. And then, all at once, there was complete darkness. I looked around me in the vast expanse of nothingness, but there was nothing there. I felt completely alone and empty. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a cold, dead hand touch my shoulder. I jerked my head around in pure fear. He was right there, staring at me straight in the eyes. I was able to let out a scream, and then everything disappeared. When I awoke, I saw that I had been perspirating a lot in my sleep. I didn't think it was possible to sweat this much in one night. There was literally standing water on my sheets. This was really starting to freak me out, so I ran to the bathroom to wash my face with cold water. I got to the bathroom and started splashing my face. The cold water felt so good on my dry skin. I kept splashing my face over and over for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself stop. It just felt so good. All I could think of for the rest of the day was getting into water, splashing my face again, or getting into any wet environment I could find. I ended up just filling the tub with cold water and sitting in it for hours. It seemed to be the only relief that I could get. Then, the cough started. At first, it was just a small cough that one would use to clear out a mildly congested throat, but soon turned into an awful hacking. I kept coughing until I started to cough up blood. I looked into the bathwater and noticed the dark red drops dissipating into the water. I stood up in shock, ready to cry. I ran outside completely naked, instantly feeling the need to get to water again. I ran to the lake that was located on the edge of our property and threw myself into it. It felt amazing. I was happy. Happier than I could ever remember feeling in my life. I just floated peacefully on my back for a while, until the coughing started up again. I came to the edge and started hacking and spluttering blood onto the ground. There was so much blood. Too much blood. I should be dead already, I thought. I started to feel like I was going to throw up, when something came out of my mouth with one of the coughs. It was pink and fleshy. I took a closer look at it and realized that it was one of my tonsils. I fell back in horror as I began coughing even harder. I proceeded to cough up my other tonsil, everything in my stomach, and then my stomach itself. I was coughing up my insides, but how was I not dead yet? Shouldn't I be dead without my stomach? Maybe I am dead, I thought to myself. I started coughing up more organs, heaving and spluttering fluids and intestines everywhere. My heart was next, then my lungs. I almost laughed as I thought of the trite saying, what was it? Coughing up a lung? You may be wondering why I was laughing. Well, it didn't hurt. I felt nothing but wet, bloody organs sliding up my throat. I was so crazed that it didn't even seem real. After I finally pulled the last of my large intestine out of my gullet, I was empty. Completely empty except for my muscles, skin, brains and bones. I felt surprisingly calm. And then I blacked out as I slid back into the water. When I awoke, I was on the bottom of the lake. I felt extremely light and my inside felt empty. But it was empty. I looked out into the murky darkness that I now call home. I could see very little from my spot in the lake, but I was happier than I could imagine. I don't know how long it has been, but I know it's been several years. I haven't seen any other beings like myself down here, but I know they have to exist. How do I know this? Well, you see, I've started to secrete a liquid of my own. It is light purple in colour and much lighter weight than water. I found some old bottles and things on the bottom of the lake to keep a bit of it in. It's a bit lonely down here. I wonder if anyone will find one of my bottles and be foolish enough to drink it, like I did. Some company would be really nice. When Daniel opened his front door that morning, he immediately regretted it. Standing in his porch was his drug dealer, towering over him at 6'9" with shoulders as wide as cliffs, his furious grey eyes beaming down into him. Daniel, remembering the 5 figures he owed him, could only watch as his scarred knuckles homed in right between his eyes. Daniel regained consciousness, still in the dark, only feeling the stinging of a mighty blow now. His woozy head still believed that he was in a dream, and his stomach felt frail and sick. When he realized he was fully awake, he snapped out of his trance, feeling himself lying down and cramped into a box. Oh Jesus, no. I've been buried alive. He panicked and began flailing around, feeling the strong, thick wood that trapped him. He did this for a few seconds until he felt something slide off the top of his belly and heard it fall on the wood close behind him. He felt around and gripped a rubbery, thin cylinder that was wide at the top. He picked it up. A torch. He rubbed his thumb up and down, feeling for the switch, clicking on when he found it. He shone the torch around on his brown slits of wood, confirming that he had been boxed in somewhere alone. He shone it at the top and saw a 3-line message written in black marker directly above him. You got lucky. Next time, there's no escape. Punch here for freedom. Below that, there were 3 arrows in additional black marker, pointing to a circle that was a lighter shade of brown to the rest of the wood. It must be the world's softest dealers, Daniel thought to himself, counting his luck. Daniel clutched his hand into a fist, driving it into the circle as fast as he could. It didn't break, but he could tell easily that it was by far the weakest point. He tried again, but still was unsuccessful. One more should do it. Daniel's hand penetrated the top as water gushed down around him like a tap that was suddenly turned too hard. Daniel choked in the salty seawater that forced its way into his mouth and down his throat as it engulfed his face and body and chilled him to the bone. Daniel desperately punched the top of the box with both hands slowly, the resisting water absorbing his force. Before he knew it, the box was completely full. He banged with his fists and kicked with his legs until his muscles weakened and gave in, and his vision faded to black. Ever since Sarah was a little girl, she was terrified of clowns. Fortunately for her pride, a lot of people harbour that same fear. The idea of a person being goofy and happy all the time, dressed up in a silly costume, made a lot of folks uneasy. So she wasn't alone in that discomfort category. Growing up, she rarely had to encounter one of those over-enthusiastic men or women in face paint and crazy, colourful hair. But when she did, it was bad. So bad, in fact, that she eventually had to go to therapy through much of middle and high school because of nightmares induced by the fear of clowns. As Sarah got older and progressed through therapy sessions, her fear eventually began to dissipate. She wouldn't shut her eyes every time she saw a clown smiling at her from her television screen, or when browsing the internet and accidentally seeing a picture of Pennywise from Stephen King's It. She learned to control her fear so that it wouldn't control her. Her first year of college was perfect because of her newfound ability to stem the cry of the jester-created demons she had within. It would not be for long, however, because she would find that great fear can and would return, and in the most sinister way possible. It was mid-March, and Sarah was as busy as ever, juggling the workload of a typical in-the-trenches college student. It was a Tuesday, and Sarah had just gotten out of the last class of the day, an important psychology lecture by a guest speaker that had lasted for about 2 hours. As she was making her way back to her on-campus apartment, a young man, apparently in a rush, collided with her, causing them both to fall to the ground. Sarah landed on her back, her bag flying off her shoulder. Angry at the man's idiocy, Sarah slowly sat up to ask him how in the world he could be so unaware of his surroundings, but was shocked to find the man was nowhere to be found. Scanning the immediate area, there was no sign of him. Shaking her head, she got to her feet. Picking up her bag, she noticed a flyer face down on the ground. That Neanderthal must have dropped it during his hit and run, she thought. Sarah picked it up and turned it over and gasped. It was promoting a special event called Night of the Clowns. Posted underneath, in the middle of the promo, was a picture of a creepy clown with dark blue hair and a big orange smile plastered on his white face. Below his picture, there was a short description about the event. Are you ready for laughs a minute? Goofballs that could make your grouchy grandma grin? Then look no further, guys and gals, because Night of the Clowns is in town. Prepare for a night of food, fun and games, hosted by us kooky clowns, and absolutely free. Come along or bring the entire family. All are welcome. Right underneath the description, there were directions and the starting time of the event. Confused, Sarah read that information again. She read that it would be located at the MacArthur Fairgrounds, but she knew that the fairgrounds had been closed for a good 2 months ago due to the country wanting to develop the land for housing and business. There would never be any kind of festival or carnival or anything like that there ever again. Shaking her head, she continued reading it, and it would begin at 8 PM that night, and that it would last until early the next morning. Why would anyone want to spend an entire night with some crazy clowns? Sarah couldn't understand. She looked at the clown on the flyer again, his eyes staring back at her. She studied the flyer, trying to remember if by chance she ever heard of an event called Night of the Clowns. Nothing came to mind. It was just too weird. She shook her head and tossed the flyer in the garbage. No thanks, she thought. No clowns for me. At about 7:50 in the evening, Sarah was on the couch in the living room watching television and having some Chinese takeout for dinner. Her roommate, Dawn, was out with her boyfriend, so Sarah knew she'd be there alone for a while. As she sat there, Sarah figured she could give her boyfriend, Jesse, a call to see if he wasn't busy so he could come over. But then she remembered why he wasn't over by now anyway. He would be at work until midnight. Defeated by the realization she'd be home alone for a while, she sighed and ate a forkful of chow mein, flipping through channels. She passed over shows like Dirty Jobs and Criminal Minds, not finding anything she wanted to watch, until she saw that Man of Steel was on HBO. As she began watching the movie, she noticed the picture of her TV begin to become fuzzy. Suddenly, the screen went from showing Superman fighting General Zod in Metropolis to a disturbing face of a sad clown with dark makeup. It was juxtaposed across the entire screen, and it made Sarah jump in her seat. The clown just stared at her and motioned for her to come closer. Sarah fumbled for the remote and shut off the TV. She shook her head. Damn clowns. For the life of her, she didn't know how in the hell it went from Superman to a freaky clown. But she didn't care. Enough TV for tonight. She looked at her phone and saw that it was 8 PM. She jumped when her cell phone suddenly rang. She looked at the number and didn't recognize who the caller was. Sarah answered the phone. "Hello?" she said. After a few moments of silence, a voice that sounded like Disney's Goofy responded. "We were waiting for you, Sarah. We're starting the fun. We need you here." Sarah tried to pinpoint anything about the silly voice that might seem familiar and laughed. "Okay, who is this? Jesse, cut it out." The person chuckled. No, not Jesse." Sarah, still smiling, shook her head. "Okay, well, whoever this is, I'm going to go now." Before Sarah could hang up, however, the voice laughed hysterically, and suddenly her television came back on. As Sarah watched in horror, that same creepy, sad clown was looking at her, this time standing next to a man in a chair with his hands tied behind his back. The clown held a knife to the man's throat. As Sarah slowly recognized who the man was, she uttered a cry and cupped her mouth with a hand. "I wouldn't just hang up yet, Sarah, or poor little Jessie will have to go away." Sarah looked at her phone, terrified and shaking all over. Who are you? What the hell is this?" Her eyes glued to the television. She could hear the man on the phone let out a throaty guffaw. "I'm just a clown, Sarah. You're not afraid of clowns anymore, right?" Tears began to fall down her cheek as she looked at Jessie's terrified expression. She choked back her tears. No, I'm not. Please, just let him go." The man sighed deeply. "Of course, but you have to come here first. Come to the Night of the Clowns. We're waiting, Sarah. We're waiting." The man hung up and the television went dark. Sarah sat there in shock, her phone still pressed firmly against her ear. She slowly lowered the phone and thought about calling the police. As she dialed 911, she realized that this wasn't a guy messing with her TV or some average Joe kidnapper. This was paranormal, something outside of the realm of logic entirely. She understood what she had to do to save her boyfriend. She had to go to the Night of the Clowns. Sarah drove as fast as she could to the MacArthur Fairgrounds outside of the city. The closer she drove to the area surrounding the fairgrounds, a thick, heavy fog enveloped her car. Before she knew it, she had arrived at the large, closed iron gate of the fairground entrance. She was shocked to see a grand marquis, accompanied by a bubbly, clown-faced greeter from above. Bright strobe lights in different colours lighting up the night sky. She looked past the rusty bars of the iron gate and could see game booths and rides of all kinds. There was loud, carnival music booming into the air, and the distinct sound of children's laughter. What she didn't see, however, were people. Anywhere. It was as if the entire place was run by ghosts. Sarah slowly got out of her car, and almost immediately, the gate began to creak open. She cautiously approached the gate, looking around nervously. Suddenly, a group of clowns appeared before her, laughing and encouraging her to come inside. They wore an assortment of costumes, wearing different kinds of wigs and hats. There were male and female clowns, all flashing her painted, creepy grins. Sarah approached them, sweating with fear. "Okay, I'm here. Where is he?" One of the clowns, wearing a top hat and carrying a funny-looking cane, looked at the rest of the clown posse and giggled. He looked at Sarah and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll take you right to him, my dear. Then we can all have a splendid time." The clown wrapped an arm around her neck playfully, and all the other clowns giggled. Scared to say or do anything, Sarah allowed the clowns to lead her to Jessie. As she passed ride after ride, booth after booth, she noticed that more and more clowns surrounded her. She also noticed that their faces became more disturbing, their forms more monster-like, as they moved deeper into the twisted carnival. She saw clowns that were impossibly tall and slender reach out to her, smiling at her with stained, yellow teeth. She saw a clown hunched over like some type of animal, hissing at her, a tongue like a lizard's flicking in and out between her crimson lips. One clown she passed was wearing a crude, fleshy mask over his face, covered in blood. His red eyes seemed to shine like eerie orbs of light. The group of clowns escorting her finally arrived at a large polka dot tent. The clown in the top hat spun Sarah by the shoulders so she could face him. Sarah trembled as she looked into his evil, manic eyes. "Where is he?" The clown tilted his head, motioning to the large tent. "Right in here, my dear. Go inside and we'll get started." He let go of her shoulder, and Sarah slowly walked into the tent. She was greeted by bright lights and great applause. She held a hand over her eyes, almost blinded by the light. She blinked several times and saw that there were hundreds of clowns sitting in bleachers surrounding her, and watching her with glee written all over their painted faces. In front of her, she saw Jessie, still tied up in the chair, with that creepy, sad clown wielding the blade dangerously close to his neck. Sarah cried in anger and ran towards Jessie and the clown. She was mere steps away when the clown pressed the blade harder against Jessie's throat. Jessie looked at her boyfriend and realized he had passed out. She looked at the menacing clown holding him hostage, fury in her eyes. "Let him go!" she screamed. The clown just looked at her with his dark frown, and then at Jessie. He shook his head sadly, and without warning, slit Jessie's throat wide open. Blood sprayed everywhere as Jessie convulsed in the chair, a sickening gurgle coming from his throat as he stared at Sarah with terrified eyes. Sarah, without thinking, ran up to the clown and punched him in the face. The clown fell backwards, the knife flying from his gloved hand. The clown watched as Sarah cradled Jessie in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah felt Jessie go limp in her arms as blood ran down her chest. She heaved as she held his head, crying uncontrollably. He didn't deserve this, and she felt the inevitable wave of guilt come over her. This is all my fault, she thought. A disturbing cackle to her right caused her to snap her head up, and she could see the sad-faced clown was now getting up, smiling at her. Gently laying Jesse's head down, Sarah quickly got up and picked up the knife. Before he could utter a word, she pounced on him, tackling him to the ground. With the mentality of a deranged animal stricken with grief, she stabbed the sad clown in the chest over and over and over. The clown cried out in protest, telling her to stop. Even after the clown's eyes closed, his death apparent, Sarah kept stabbing him. After a few minutes, she finally stopped and looked up, her shirt stained with his blood now. She looked at the crowd. They were silent, unmoving, waiting for her next move. Crying, she threw the knife to the ground. "Are you happy now? Look at what you've done to me!" she screamed. The clowns continued to watch her in silence. Finally, the clown with the top hat and funny cane entered the tent. His eyes widened when he saw the sad clown lying in a pool of blood. He looked at Sarah and smiled. Raising his arms in the air, he faced the crowd of clowns. "Wackos and jokers, jesters and loons, she has done it! Our Sarah has done it! Finally conquered her fear of us!" The clown audience erupted into laughter and applause, jumping up and down in their seats. They threw flowers and streams and sprayed silly string into the air. The clown approached Sarah, his grin getting wider as he got closer. She stared at him with the utmost hate in her eyes. "Just leave me be, please," she cried. The clown shook his head and motioned to the crowd. "Leave? Why, my dear, you are never going to leave." Sarah looked at him, shaking her head in confusion. "But why? What have I done to you?" The clown laughed and wrapped his arm around her shoulders once more, pointing to the crowd. "Nothing, Sarah. You've done nothing to any of us. This isn't some kind of revenge thing. No. It's something far greater. A test." Sarah, tears in her eyes, looked at him. A test?" He nodded. "Yes, a test. You passed with flying colours. We had to see if you were ready to join us." Sarah looked at him, a chill running down her spine, making her legs feel like spaghetti noodles. Join you?" He nodded once more and laughed. "Yes, join us. We seek out those who fear us and help them understand we aren't that bad. Once they finally understand, they become part of our big, crazy family forever." Sarah, horrified, tried to run away, but the clown held her tightly. She screamed, "Please, let me go. I lost my boyfriend. Isn't that enough for you?" The clown shook his head. "He was just part of our test. He wasn't important. What's important is the fact that you passed. Now you're one of us. Here, take a look." The clown pulled out a large red mirror from the back of his striped trousers and handed it to Sarah. She turned it